بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وأشهد أن محمدا عبد الله ورسوله صلوات الله وسلامه عليه وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين أما بعد. So tonight inshallah we will go through masail of Laylatul Qadr and some masail of Itikaaf. But before that, in the last lesson, I mentioned the mas'ala of reciting Surah Qalam in the first rak'ah of taraweeh, and that was a mistake. The fuqaha in the books, they write Surah Al-Qalam, but I didn't process that they meant Iqra wa rabbuk, what they say, Iqra bismi rabbika alladhi allama bil qalam. So they called Surah Qalam, they saw Iqra, they called it Surah Qalam based on that verse. So what they meant in their books when they say the first thing you recite in Taraweeh, either the first rak'ah, as the mashhur of the madhab says, or the riwayah thaniya, Shaykh Taqiyuddin Salatul Isha, you recite Surah Iqra. They say because it's the first thing that was revealed. It is the first surah that was revealed, or the first few ayat that was revealed. And then after that, if you do it in Taraweeh, the second rak'ah, you start Surah Al-Baqarah. And if it's in Isha, then you read Surah Iqra and then you start Al-Baqarah in Salatul Taraweeh. So I just wanted to clear that up. And the reason for that was because it's the first few ayat that were revealed, and it was they actually refer to Iqra bismi rabbika alladhi khalaq, and not Surah Qalam as I mentioned, because I didn't process it at the moment. Okay, so with regards to Laylatul Qadr, Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim, they say وَتُرْجَى Laylatul Qadri فِي الْعَشْرِ الْأَوَاخِرِ. So they say Laylatul Qadr, Laylatul Qadr is a very important night. It's a great night, and it's a night where dua is most likely answered. It's a night where dua is most likely answered. And they say, Allah says, Laylatul Qadr khayrun min alfi shahr. They say the meaning that Laylatul Qadr, the night of Qadr, is better than 1,000 months, meaning ibadah on Laylatul Qadr is better than ibadah for 1,000 months wherein there is no Laylatul Qadr. And then they say, fil ashril awakhir. They say that Laylatul Qadr is most likely going to take place in the last 10 nights of Ramadan. They say most likely going to take place in the last 10 nights of Ramadan. But there are many opinions on when Laylatul Qadr will take place. Amongst them, like Ibn Qudama and others mentioned that it could take place in the whole of Ramadan, not only the last 10 nights, in the whole of Ramadan. And others mentioned that it could take place in the whole year, any time in the year. They can take place any time in the year. And then Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam said, تَحَرَّوْا لَيْلَةُ الْقَدْرِ فِي الْعَشْرِ الْأَوَاخِرِ مِنْ Ramadan. That look, try and find Laylatul Qadr in the last 10 nights of Ramadan. This hadith is in Bukhari and Muslim. And based on this hadith, they say it's most likely to be found, this and many other ahadith in the last 10 nights of Ramadan. And Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam said, مَنْ قَامَ لَيْلَةَ الْقَدْرِ إِيمَانًا وَاحْتِسَابًا غُفِرَ لَهُ مَا تَقَدَّمَ مِنْ ذَنْبِهِ. Whoever performs Qiyamul Layl on Laylatul Qadr with belief in Allah and in hope of reward from Allah, then this person's past sins will be forgiven. And here in Imam Ahmad, there's an increase in the wording which says وَمَا تَقَدَّمَ, and also his future sins. And that's what we mentioned last time. And I actually mentioned the hadith, that this increased wording in the hadith is for the one who ever stands in prayer in Ramadan. That was also a slip. It's actually for Laylatul Qadr. And then what I mentioned there is applied here as well. So they say whoever stands for Laylatul Qadr, then he will have his sins forgiven. So here they say two things. They say a person in Ramadan, he'll have his sins forgiven twice. Number one, if he stands for the month of Ramadan in Qiyamul Layl, normal Qiyamul Layl, that's the first forgiveness of the sins, as we mentioned last time, the hadith, for when we spoke on Taraweeh. And secondly, they mention for a person who stands in Laylatul Qadr in Qiyamul Layl, then this person will be forgiven again. So that's the second time. And they say, مَنْ قَامَ رَمَضَانَ إِيمَانًا وَاحْتِسَابًا. For that other hadith, whoever spends Ramadan, whoever spends the nights of Ramadan in Qiyamul Layl, for that person is the forgiveness of the sins, and that refers to the entire month of Ramadan. That means a person who did not stand in Qiyamul Layl on any night for Ramadan without a valid excuse, then that reward cannot apply to him. And then they mention why is Laylatul Qadr named Laylatul Qadr. So they say وسميت بذلك لأنه يقدر فيها ما يكون في تلك السنة. So they say that it's named Laylatul Qadr because things that are going to be decreed in that year, in the upcoming year, they get written down on Laylatul Qadr. So there's a narration from Ikrimah radiyallahu anhu who says, he says that this happens on the 15th of Sha'ban. But many say that this chain of narration is not authentic. It's not authentic. And Allah says, فِيهَا يُفْرَقُ كُلُّ أَمْرٍ حَكِيمٍ. On this night of Qadr is when things are decreed. Things are decreed. So it's on the night of Qadr. Ibn Abbas radiyallahu anhu, he has a narration where he says that on the 15th of Sha'ban, the things that are decreed come down. They, like the first coming down, it occurs on the 15th of Sha'ban, then it goes to the angels on the night of Qadr, where now the angels get the books to know what's going to occur in the upcoming year. And now connected to this, the ulama say, what did we say just now? We said dua is very important of the night of Qadr. Dua is very important of the night of Qadr. And they say that two things. They say two things. Okay, let's first mention something else and then we'll come back to this. We said last time that if a time is blessed, then it does not mean that all actions in that time will be more blessed than at other times. But the best actions to do during the blessed time are those actions which have been narrated. They are those actions which have been narrated in the ahadith. So for Laylatul Qadr, what has been narrated? There's a few things. Number one, Qiyamul Layl, as we mentioned. Number two, reciting the Quran. Number three, Itikaaf. And number four is dua. Other actions that have not been specifically narrated to be done on Laylatul Qadr, they are fadilah, they are virtuous, more virtuous than other times, but they're not afdal, or they are mafdul and not fadil. And they are virtuous, but they are not the most virtuous things that should be done on the night of Qadr. And that's why also connected to this, the ulama speak on the mas'ala of zakah in Ramadan. There's a question whether they acknowledge it is virtuous to give it in Ramadan, but is it the best? Because the Sahaba, many of them did what? They competed with each other in giving nafl charity and feeding people in the month of Ramadan. And the mas'ala on zakah, in which month zakah should be given, or the month of the zakah of the Sahaba was given, that the ulama differ. Inshallah, at another time we'll mention it because there's a narration from Uthman radiyallahu anhu where he indicates this mas'ala. And he mentions a month. And the fuqaha question, which month is this? So we're just making an ishara to it, but inshallah in the future we'll mention it. So these are four things that have been narrated. Umrah and other things, the apparent sunnah is that it's the same in the entire month of Ramadan. So that it's the same in terms of extra virtue in the entire month of Ramadan. And Laylatul Qadr, these four things are the most virtuous to do, and they are the most virtuous things which Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam did. So dua. Now we have the narration where Aisha radiyallahu anha, she asked Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam, she said, in wafaqtuha bima ad'u. If it happens that I know it's Laylatul Qadr and that I am doing ibadah on what is actually Laylatul Qadr, then which words should I use to supplicate with? So here some of the ulama, like Samurri from the Hanabila, they point out that dua is most likely accepted in this month, on this night. Why? Because she says if it happens to be Laylatul Qadr, then she doesn't ask what should I do. She says which words should I use in my dua. She says which words should I do in my dua. And that is from the fiqh of the Sahaba. She understood the dua aspect, about the importance of dua, and she also understood that it didn't mean you just do any virtuous actions. What you should do is those things that are the most blessed. Those things that are the most blessed. So then, and why we mention dua again here when I mentioned about Qadr is because dua and Qadr, they have a connection. Dua and Qadr have a connection. Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam said that nothing can repel or kind of change Qadr other than dua. So now the question would come, can dua change Qadr? Can dua change Qadr, or does dua change Qadr? Because everything is written. So we say that Qadr, the decree of Allah, is divided into four categories. Number one, it is the qadr that is with Allah in the Lawh al-Mahfuz. It's in the preserved tablet, in the knowledge of Allah that Allah has and it doesn't change. And this is when Allah Azza wa Jal created the pen, Allah said to it, write. So the pen said, Ya, my Lord, what should I write? So Allah said to it, write everything that will be decreed until the day of Qiyamah. So this is the first type of qadr, and it's a qadr that's in the preserved tablet, the Lawh al-Mahfuz. The second type of qadr is a qadr that is written for a person when he's born, when he's in the womb of his mother. After plus minus 120 days, the soul is blown in. There's difference on this, on how to understand this with the other narration, but let's just use this one to get to the point. And that is, now what is written for a person is a few things, like how long will he live, his age, his actions that he will do, whether he'll be a person of Jannah or a person of Jahannam. May Allah protect us. Whether he'll be a person of Jannah or Jahannam, those few things are written on when the person is still in the womb of his mother. So that's the qadr that happens for a person at that time for his life. Then the third type of qadr is the yearly qadr, and this is what comes on Laylatul Qadr. On Laylatul Qadr, things that are happening in the upcoming year, they are given to the angels now on this night. Of course, they are known by Allah. And then the fourth type of qadr is a daily qadr. A daily qadr that is decreed every day. Allah says, يَسْأَلُهُ مَنْ فِي السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ. Those those in the heavens and the earth, they call out to Allah every day. كُلَّ يَوْمٍ هُوَ فِي شَأْنٍ. Every day Allah has affairs that He deals with. Every day Allah has affairs that He deals with. So that shows there are four types of qadr. So now the first type of qadr that is in the Lawh al-Mahfuz, that is with Allah's preserved knowledge, and no one has access to this and knows what's in there. That is only Allah knows. And then the other types of qadr, these, the angels get access to it. But the angels get access only to what Allah gives them access to. And those scrolls of qadr that are come to the hands of the angels, those scrolls, their qadr can be changed. Their qadr can be changed. What type of qadr? They say qadr al-mu'allaq. They say al-qadr al-mubram and al-qadr al-mu'allaq. There's a qadr that is firm, it will never change. And then there is a qadr that is hanging. A qadr that is hanging. So it's hanging on what? It's like it's written in the scrolls of the angels that this person, his life will be so many years. But if he joins family ties or if he gives charity, his life will be that long. Either this long or that long. If he doesn't, it will be this long. So either more, either less. It's hanging based on him giving charity or based on him supplicating, making dua, based on him joining family ties. Or another person, this calamity will happen to him unless he gives charity. If he gives charity, it won't happen to him. So this is a hanging qadr that can change from what is in the scrolls of the angels. But what is with Allah in the Lawh al-Mahfuz, Allah knows whether you'd give charity or not. Allah knows whether you'd supplicate or not. But the angel that's going to carry what the command is out, what the qadr is, the angel that's going to carry it out, this can change. And this is what Allah indicates to in the Quran, where He says, يَمْحُ اللَّهُ مَا يَشَاءُ وَيُثْبِتْ Allah وَعِنْدَهُ أُمُّ الْكِتَابِ. Allah says that He deletes whatever He wishes and He affirms and preserves whatever He wishes. He deletes whatever He wishes, that means from the qadr that is not with Allah, because Allah says in the end of that verse, وَعِنْدَهُ أُمُّ الْكِتَابِ. And with Allah is we can translate it literally, the mother of all books, which is referring to what's in the Lawh al-Mahfuz. What with Allah is what's in the Lawh al-Mahfuz. And the rest of it, Allah can delete what He wills and preserve or keep what He wills. And that's referring to the hanging qadr, that if a person gives charity, then this calamity will not strike him. So then a person gives charity, it gets deleted. The yamhu Allah deletes it. And then if a person, let's say he does not give charity and what is written is a calamity on him, and then he does not give charity, then the calamity would be وَيُثْبِتْ, he is affirmed. But Allah in His complete knowledge, He knows whether the person would or would not give charity, or would or would not supplicate, or would or would not join family ties, and things like that. So that's how we understand the qadr and the dua changing qadr. The second reason why Laylatul Qadr is named Laylatul Qadr is because it is a night that's very great to Allah. It's a night that's very great to Allah. And the third reason is because good deeds on the night of Qadr the virtue and the reward is much more. It's much greater. It's much greater. As we said, better than ibadah done in 1,000 months that do not include Laylatul Qadr. So now here, the ulama say that it refers to nafl actions, not fard. Because the fard, any fard is better than a nafl action. Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam said that Allah said in a hadith Qudsi that my slave, the thing that my slave does that would make him get the closest to me are those things which I've made fard on him, are those things that are obligatory on him. That's what a person would get the closest to Allah by doing. So that shows that nafl actions on the night of Qadr, they are the ones that are extra virtuous. But the fard, a fard is much better than a nafl. So a person can't decide that he's going to do ibadah in the last 10 nights of Ramadan, for example, and ensure he gets Laylatul Qadr, and then it's better than doing ibadah for 1,000 years, so he leaves out the fara'id or the wajibat. It does not work like that. It's not referring to that. And then they say, وَهِيَ أَفْضَلُ اللَّيَالِ وَهِيَ بَاقِيَةٌ لَمْ تُرْفَعْ. They say Laylatul Qadr is not, it's a night, it's the best night. They say it's the best night of the year. Other ulama say the night of Jumu'ah is the best night of the year, because Jumu'ah repeats itself. Jumu'ah repeats itself, so a person can gain virtue by doing ibadah in a night that repeats, compared to just one night. And others say, a third opinion is that Laylatul Qadr, the Laylatul Qadr when the Quran came down to the first heaven, that's the best night. And thereafter, so that's specifically, that's the best night. Then Jumu'ah is better because it recurs. So that's the three opinions connected to the best night. That's the three opinions connected to the best night. And in Laylatul Qadr, the ulama say a person should try and not sleep lying down, because he should busy himself in ibadah, so he should try and sleep only when he's extremely tired, and sleep is going to overtake him, number one. Number two, he should try and sleep cross-legged, and while the most he can do is like lean on something, lean on a wall or something cross-legged, and only try and sleep when he's pushed over, when the sleep is overtaking him, so that he can spend most of his night in ibadah. And also, if he's sleeping in a sitting manner, perhaps he won't go into too deep a sleep, and he can get up and then continue in ibadah. And then they say that وآتاره آكد. They say that the most likely nights of Laylatul Qadr in the last 10 nights of Ramadan are the odd nights. They are the odd nights. Now here, to calculate the odd nights, the ulama actually have two ways to calculate it. Most of the ulama say the odd nights are 21, 23, 25, 27 and 29. But some ulama, like Ibn Taymiyyah rahmatullahi alayhi, he says Abu Sa'id al-Khudri radiyallahu anhu also interpreted some of the ahadith in the way I'm going to explain now, that the odd nights, you look at whether the nights are odd or even according to how many nights they are in the year, in the month, and then you count it backwards. So that means why? Because Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam, in some narrations, he said that Laylatul Qadr is when they are it's on the 9th remaining night. On the 9th remaining night. So you can say 9th remaining night from the beginning of the month or from the end of the month. So Sheikh Taqiyuddin Ibn Taymiyyah rahmatullahi alayhi and Abu Sa'id al-Khudri radiyallahu anhu, they said they understood remaining to mean from the end of the night, from the end of the month. So that means, let's say there's 30 nights. So night 30 is going to be 1. Night 30 is going to be your first of the last 10. And then 29 becomes 2, night 2. So that becomes even. And then 28, night 3. So it becomes odd. And then 27 is night 4. And like that you'd count it. So that means if there were 29 nights, then 29 would be night 1. So it would be odd. 28, night 2, so even. 27, night 3, so odd. So when there's 29 nights or 29 days in the month, then whether you count the remaining days from the beginning or from the end, the odd nights would be 21, 23, 25, 27, 29. It's the same. But when there's 30 nights in the month, when there's 30 nights in the month, and the second opinion of the ulama is that you count it backwards, which means night 30 would be night 1 of the odd nights. Or you can count it in, night 1, and then 29, night 2, and then 28, night 3, and like that you count it. The conclusion would be for a person to get Laylatul Qadr on both calculations, he should do ibadah on all the last 10 nights. On all the last 10 nights, not only the odd, which would be 21, 23, 25 according to most. And the odd, according to the other opinion, we'd only know when the month ends. We'd only know when the month ends. Because if it's 30 days, then it's different. Then the odd numbers, 22, 24, 26, they become even counting backwards. And if the month ended up being 29, then the counting on both opinions would be the same. So only at the end of the month would we know. Only at the end of the month would we know. Then وَلَيْلَةُ سَبْعٍ وَعِشْرِينَ أَبْلَغْ أَيْ أَرْجَاهَا. So here they say the most likely of the last 10 nights to be Laylatul Qadr would be night 27. And that's the opinion of many of the Sahaba, like Abdullah ibn Abbas, like Ubay ibn Ka'b, like Tarafa ibn Ka'b, radiyallahu anhum ajma'in. Tarafa ibn Ka'b, like Ibn Mas'ud as well, radiyallahu anhu. Tarafa ibn Ka'b says that Ibn Mas'ud radiyallahu anhu knew that the 27th night of Ramadan is Laylatul Qadr, but he did not want to tell you guys. He did not want to expose it, because then people will become lazy in ibadah on most of the nights, and then only on 27 would they then try and go all out for ibadah. So to try and get people to do ibadah on many nights, he did not expose to them that the 27th is the night of Qadr, Laylatul Qadr. And then Ibn Abbas radiyallahu anhu, he indicates Laylatul Qadr being the 27th through another angle. And he says, Surah Al-Qadr, Inna anzalnahu fi Laylatul Qadr, has 30 words. The 27th word is hiya. Salamun hiya hatta matla'il fajr. Hiya means it. So he looked at it, he came from another angle, and to look at how another perspective that 27th may be Laylatul Qadr, most likely will be Laylatul Qadr. And then the ulama say Laylatul Qadr changes every year. The ulama say Laylatul Qadr changes every year. So it's not always on the 21st or 22nd or 23rd, or if we say throughout the month of Ramadan, it's not always on the 17th or whatever month. It changes every year between the nights. And based on this, the ulama mention a mas'ala. This is found according to all the madhahib, and they say if a man gave his wife Talaaq, and he said, I divorce you on Laylatul Qadr, then they question, when would the Talaaq fall? Which night? So, anyone have any answer? If a husband said to his wife, I divorce you on Laylatul Qadr, which night does the Talaaq fall?
It will come to know at the end of the month.
Come to know at the end of the month. Subhanallah, ya Shaykh Umar. Anyone else? طيب, Shaykh Abdul Nasir Samit, Shaykh Abdul Haq Mufir. So the ulama say, if a husband told his wife, I give you Talaaq on Laylatul Qadr, which night does this Talaaq fall on? They say, if he gave the Talaaq before any of the last 10 nights started, then the Talaaq would officially fall at the end of the month, because then for sure the last 10 nights have occurred and Laylatul Qadr was one of them. So if he gave before the last 10 started, then Talaaq would officially fall at the end of the month, because then for sure Laylatul Qadr has passed. And if he gave Talaaq after a night of the last 10, then the Talaaq would officially fall the next year after the last 10 nights. The end of Ramadan, the next year, then the Talaaq would officially fall. Why? Because let's say night 21, the first of the last 10 nights, and he gave Talaaq, let's say day 22 or night 22 or after, perhaps night 21 was Laylatul Qadr. So that would mean his Talaaq cannot occur that year, because Laylatul Qadr is finished. So they say on the next year. And then an interesting incident with Talaaq is that a lady once said to her husband, she said to her husband, أنت سفيه, that you are a fool, you are an idiot. So she said to her husband, so he said to his wife, that if I am an idiot, then you are divorced. Then you are divorced. So the husband and wife did not know now whether talaq has occurred or whether it hasn't occurred. So they were wondering, if the husband is an idiot, talaq has occurred. If he is not, there's no talaq. And this happened in the time of Imam Malik rahmatullahi alayh. So they went to Imam Malik and they explained to him the situation. So they are trying to conclude, is the husband an idiot that talaq occurs, or is he not? He's not somebody who's foolish or an idiot. Then talaq does not occur. So listen to the answer of Imam Malik. Imam Malik rahmatullahi alayhi said to him that if you are a student of knowledge, then you are not a fool, and talaq does not occur. But if you do not seek knowledge, then you are an idiot and talaq falls. So that just shows the virtue of seeking knowledge according to these great scholars. And this shows the importance and the amazingness of seeking knowledge. So that was just a side note. Then the ulama speak on the signs of Laylatul Qadr. They mention a few from Taraf and Ka'b and others. Amongst the signs are that the night is of moderate temperature, and that it's a very calm and tranquil night, and that on the day after Laylatul Qadr and the sun comes out, then there's not too much of sun rays coming out of the sun. It doesn't rise with lots of sun rays. So that's a few signs of Laylatul Qadr. Then they say that the best month in Islam is Laylatul Qadr. The best month in Islam, they say, is Ramadan. And Shaykh Ibn Taymiyyah rahmatullahi alayhi, he says, if anyone deems Rajab more important than Ramadan, then that person is as good as out of the fold of Islam, because of the importance of Ramadan. And they say, they speak on the best day of the year. They say the best day of the week is Friday. And then when they say the best day of the year, some of the ulama say the best day of the year is the day of Eid al-Adha, Yawm al-Nahr. And others say it's the day of Arafah. Others say it's the day of Arafah. And the last opinion, which Ibn Muflih from the Hanabila attributes to some Shafi'iyah, where they say it is the day of Jumu'ah, So that's the three opinions regarding which day of the year is the best day. And they say the best night for Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam is the night of Isra, the night of Laylatul of Isra. And for the Ummah, as we said, Laylatul Qadr. And there's the difference of opinion with regards to Jumu'ah. And then they say the first 10 days of Dhul Hijjah, altogether are better than the last 10 days of Ramadan. So when I say day, it means day and night, right? Others say that days, as in excluding the night, the days of Dhul Hijjah are better than the days of Ramadan, but the nights of Ramadan are better than the nights of Dhul Hijjah. And others say that as a group, Ibn Rajab mentioned this, and he says that the tahqiq of the ulama is that as a group, the 10 days of Dhul Hijjah are better than the 10 days and nights are better than the last 10 days of Ramadan, but the one night of Qadr of Ramadan, that is better. That is obviously the most virtuous, but irrespective of that, the 10 days of Dhul Hijjah are better. The 10 days of Dhul Hijjah are better. And then they say, وَحِكْمَةُ إِخْفَائِهَا لِيَجْتَهِدُوا فِي طَلَبِهَا. They say the wisdom of us not being informed of Laylatul Qadr is that so that a person can then, because he doesn't know which night specifically is Laylatul Qadr, he then does more ibadah in all the nights. So it actually works out in the favor of somebody. Just like how a number of virtue or a number of the most virtuous things have not been exposed to us. Like the hour of acceptance of dua on Friday. We don't know which is exactly that hour or that minute of dua being accepted. And they say like what? Like Allah, the greatest name of Allah. Asma'ullah al-Husna, a'zamul asma. The greatest name of Allah, we don't know exactly which one is it. And that's so that we can call Allah with every name and get close to Allah with every name, not just try and focus on one name, not just try and focus on one name. And then they say وَيَدْعُوا فِيهَا لِأَنَّ الدُّعَاءَ مُسْتَجَابٌ فِيهَا بِمَا وَرَدْ. So they say, what should a person do in Laylatul Qadr? We spoke on it earlier in more detail, but here they say a person should engage in dua, because dua is accepted on that night. And they say he should mention his hajjah in his dua. He should implore Allah with all of his needs. And specifically with the dua that Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam taught Aisha radiyallahu anha, which is Allahumma innaka afuwun tuhibbul afwa fa'fu anni. Oh Allah, you love afu. You are afuwun, you love afu, and therefore show me afun. So afu means, it means as-sitr wa tark. It means to conceal and to cover. So it means, oh Allah, you love to conceal and cover. Therefore, we implore you to cover and conceal our sins and our faults and our mistakes. And it means tark, it means to leave off. So it means, Ya Allah, leave off taking us to account for our shortcomings. So that's the meaning of Allahumma innaka afuwun tuhibbul afwa fa'fu anni. And they say also in Nasa'i from Abu Hurairah radiyallahu anhu, that Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam said, Salullah al-afwa wal-afiyah wal-mu'afa fama utiya ahadun ba'da al-yaqini khayran min mu'afa. Ask Allah for afwa and for afiyah and mu'afa, because a slave is not being given anything after being given conviction and yaqeen and trust in Allah than being given afiyah. So al-afu and afiyah and mu'afa. So afu means, they say that ash-shar al-madi yazul bil-afu, that any evil traces of actions of sins in the past, it will get overlooked and covered with afu. And then the afiyah is for any difficulty from sins or from calamities in the present time. And then for the future, that is included in the word mu'afa. So that means that a person will be asking Allah for well-being and safety from sins and tawfiq for good deeds for all of his life, in the past, in the present, and in the future. Now lastly, with regards to Laylatul Qadr, is a lady who's in hayd. For example, we mentioned a few things. If we say itikaaf and we say itikaaf is in her house, her itikaaf, if she's doing it, will break if she's in hayd. And she cannot perform salah in hayd. And according to the majority of the ulama, she cannot recite Quran while she's in hayd. So does that mean she'd lose a lot of reward on Laylatul Qadr? She can of course do dhikr, she can give charity, she can supplicate. But they say in many rulings, a lady in hayd takes the ruling of somebody who is ill, somebody who is sick. And Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam said in the hadith in Bukhari from Abu Musa al-Ash'ari radiyallahu anhu, that إِذَا مَرِضَ الْعَبْدُ أَوْ سَافَرَ كُتِبَ لَهُ مَا كَانَ يَعْمَلُهُ صَحِيحًا مُقِيمًا. If a person is ill or he travels, then Allah will still write for him the deeds that he used to do while he was healthy and while he was a resident. Because when a person is ill, he doesn't have the energy and the ability to do what he used to do when he was healthy. Or when he's a traveler, he doesn't have the time or the ability or the chance to do what he could do and can do when he's a resident and at home. So therefore, if a person is constant on a specific act of worship and now he's ill or he's traveling, the reward still gets written for the person. So if a lady generally in her life tries to find Laylatul Qadr and does ibadah, specific types of ibadah, extra qiyam, extra Quran, it will still be written for her on this night of Qadr that she's in hayd. Or let's just say, because the bounties of Allah is so vast, perhaps that if on this year at least, she has the intention that she's going to try and do a lot on the last 10 nights of Ramadan, and now hayd comes, then she, inshallah, can still get the reward. She can still get the reward. And that's kind of a gift from Allah, because you get the reward without actions. So there's no reason to be sad or anything like that. It's a reward without having to go through the actions, without the difficulty of maybe standing in salah, perhaps the difficulty you'd find, or whatever it may be, because of the mercy of Allah for a person who's sick or traveling, and this lady in hayd would take the ruling of somebody who is ill. And then the next chapter, the second last one that we're going to discuss in this month of Ramadan, which is the chapter of Itikaaf. So we'll do i'tikaf inshallah today, and then hopefully finish it tomorrow. And then there's one chapter left, Zakatul Fitr. We'll do next week inshallah, the weekend, or next week, Monday and Tuesday. And then we'll continue after Ramadan inshallah, with most of the chapters that have to do with Ramadan would be covered. So now they mention Babul i'tikaf. So they say i'tikaf, the chapter of i'tikaf is mentioned in the chapter of Ramadan. They say for a few things, for a few reasons. Number one is that the i'tikaf that is the most emphasized i'tikaf is in the last 10 nights of Ramadan. So it's only apt that it gets mentioned in the chapter of fasting. And the second reason that i'tikaf gets mentioned in the chapter of fasting is because, according to a number of ulama, i'tikaf is only valid when one is fasting. I'tikaf is only valid when one is fasting. So therefore it would be apt that it's connected to the chapter of fasting. And now for i'tikaf, the hanbali madhab and the shafi'i madhab, in most of these masail, they're very similar. They're as good as the same. Here and there there's differing. Here and there there's differing. So it's as good as implementing either of the madhab and you'd achieve both. The Hanafi madhab have quite a few differences. The Hanafi madhab have quite a few differences for i'tikaf. So we're going to mention a number of the Hanafi opinions. And the Maliki, they're similar to Hanbali and Shafi'i as compared to Hanafi, but they have quite a few differences between Hanbali and Shafi'i. But they are closer to these two than the Ahnaf. So we're going to mention mainly the Hanbali, which will basically most of the Masail include Shafi'i, and Hanafi inshallah, especially where the Ahnaf differ. Then we'll mention. And so before we start, so they say the virtue of i'tikaf. So i'tikaf, there's no authentic hadith that's been narrated with regards to the virtue of i'tikaf. In fact, there's just a couple ahadith that are mentioned, and they are weak. Like in Bayhaqi, Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam said, whoever performs i'tikaf in the last 10 days of Ramadan will get the reward of doing 2 hajj and 2 umrah. But it's a weak hadith according to many ulama, Bayhaqi himself and others. So the virtue of i'tikaf itself, there's no specific virtue. It's an action that Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam and the Sahaba and those after them, all of them did it. All of them did it. And it can be one of those extremely virtuous actions that the reward is hidden and by Allah. It's by Allah, like fasting, where Allah says that fasting is for me and I reward it. Allah specifically takes it on Himself to decide the reward of fasting. And then they say that i'tikaf, the meaning of i'tikaf in fiqh is that لزوم مسجد أي لزوم مسلم عاقل ولو مميز لا غسل عليه مسجدا ولو ساعة لطاعة الله تعالى. Now generally when it comes to definitions in the chapters of fiqh, the fuqaha try to give a definition, and the definition for that chapter would be a synopsis of the masail of that chapter. So if we go through this definition, we're actually going to cover many masail that come in there, that come in the chapter. But let's see what we're going to cover here in the translation. So I'm going to basically give a translation, and here and there touch on fiqh. So they say that is for a person, a Muslim, who they don't specify being baligh here. They say he must be mumayyiz. They say the i'tikaf of a mumayyiz is valid. And mumayyiz, we spoke on who is a mumayyiz. So they don't say you need to be baligh. They say you need to be mumayyiz, and you need to be a Muslim. You need to be a Muslim. And they say luzumu masjidin. They say he has to be performing i'tikaf in a masjid. In a masjid. So what's not a masjid, in many cases, would not be valid. In many cases, not all. We'll discuss exceptions and whatnot a bit later. But the masjid. And then they say la ghusla alayhi, that he should be in a state where he does not need to perform ghusl. So he should not be a non-Muslim who's just accepted Islam and has to perform ghusl. Or he should not be in a state of major impurity, or in a state of hayd. She should not be in the state of hayd, because these people need to perform ghusl. And therefore, if there's no water, then tayammum. And if there's no water or sand to do this, then a person can go inside. Because they say, mas'ala faqid at-tahurain. It's a person who doesn't have either water to perform wudu or sand or dust to perform tayammum. How does this person pray salah? Or in this case, where you need to be at least in a state where you are not in major impurity, then this person, he doesn't have water, he doesn't have sand, in this case he can go in. He can go in. Because if he's allowed to perform salah without water and without sand, then how can we stop him from i'tikaf? And i'tikaf is lower than salah. They say walau sa'a, even if it is for a sa'a. Now when the fuqaha say sa'a, they don't mean, sa'a will translate as an hour, H-O-U-R. But they don't mean 60 minutes, they mean a short period of time. So they say, if a person, a Muslim, goes into the mosque, لِطَاعَةِ اللَّهِ, and he intends to perform any act of worship, and even if it's for a short period of time, then that can count as i'tikaf. That can count as i'tikaf. So that means that if a person just passes through the mosque, it will not count. It will not count. He has to go into the mosque for a short period of time, and it has to be for the intention of ibadah. Intention of ibadah. So then when it comes to intention, most of the ulama say for i'tikaf, you should specifically intend i'tikaf. So sometimes you'll see in some masajid there's a poster up where they say when you enter the mosque, make the intention for i'tikaf and say nawaytul i'tikaf ma dumtu fil masjid. I intend to perform i'tikaf for as long as I am in the mosque. And many times this is a quote of Imam Nawawi in Sahih Muslim. Now, Imam Nawawi is a Shafi'i scholar, and the Shafi'i scholars many times they speak more on articulating intention. Okay, we're not going to touch on that, but we already spoke on intention and what would count as an intention in fasting. So the point is a person has to intend i'tikaf. So he is going to intend he's going to the mosque for salah or for Quran or to attend a lesson or whatever it may be, but he has to intend as well i'tikaf. The second opinion from some of the muhaqqiqeen like Ibn Taymiyyah rahmatullahi alayhi is that the apparent actions of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam and the Sahaba is that they did not specifically intend i'tikaf when they entered the mosque. Rather, a person who intends to go to the mosque with the intention of doing an act of worship, automatically he gets the reward of i'tikaf. He gets the reward of i'tikaf. And they also say, if a person makes the intention of breaking his i'tikaf breaks. So this will be clear as we go through masail of i'tikaf, and then we understand the different types. But for now, just an intention to break the i'tikaf would end the reward of the i'tikaf. So you can still be in the mosque, but you've broken the intention, so you do not get the reward of i'tikaf as well. Maybe you're reciting Quran, you get the reward of the Quran still, but your i'tikaf reward will not continue because you've broken the intention. But sleep does not break the reward of i'tikaf, nor does becoming unconscious. Becoming unconscious does not break the i'tikaf. Becoming unconscious does not break the i'tikaf. Then they say i'tikaf is sunnah. I'tikaf is sunnah at all times. It's sunnah at all times, and it's more emphasized in Ramadan, during the entire month of Ramadan, and it's the most emphasized in the last 10 days of Ramadan. It's the most emphasized in the last 10 days of Ramadan. And then they speak of a mas'ala of do you have to be fasting? Do you have to be fasting while performing i'tikaf? And that's because Aisha radiallahu anha said that there's no i'tikaf for a person who's not fasting. There's no i'tikaf for a person who's not fasting. So the hanbali madhab and shafi'i madhab will say you do not need to be fasting to perform i'tikaf. They say, number one, this narration is not authentic. This wording is not authentic. Number two, they say it's a wording from Aisha radiallahu anha, and it's not from Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam. The beginning of that hadith, she says, min as-sunnah, from the sunnah. And when a sahabi says from the sunnah, then this hadith would take the ruling as if it came from Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam, because the sahabi would not narrate something that has specific virtues or specific ruling to it from themselves. They would have definitely gotten it from and only from Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam. So these ulama say that word min as-sunnah, that would make it from Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam, they say it's not authentic. Hence whatever she says afterwards, it's not going to be from Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam. So they look at it from that angle and they say fine, it would mean it's mustahab. It's mustahab to perform i'tikaf while fasting. And they do say it's mustahab. They say to get out of the difference of opinion of those who say you must fast. And who says this? We'll mention it just now. So based on that, they say i'tikaf for part of the day is valid. I'tikaf for part of the day is valid. And they say i'tikaf at night is valid. Because Umar radiallahu anhu said, Ya Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam, I took an oath to perform i'tikaf at night. Should I fulfill my oath? So Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam told him, fulfill your oath. So here the Hanabila and Shafi'iyya say that i'tikaf at night does not have fasting. And yet Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam told him, go and perform i'tikaf, fulfill your vow, fulfill your vow. So they mention that. And then they say, if a person takes an oath that he's going to, in fact, let's leave the oath rules just now. Let's first speak on the aspect of fasting and i'tikaf. So the Maliki madhab says you should be fasting to perform i'tikaf. And the Hanafi madhab divide i'tikaf into three categories. The Hanafi madhab divide i'tikaf into three categories. They say the waajib i'tikaf, and that's an i'tikaf that a person made wajib on himself. And that is through an oath. Oh Allah, I take an oath to perform 5 days of i'tikaf in Ramadan or in Dhul Hijjah, in Muharram. So he's taken an oath. Oh Allah, I take an oath to perform i'tikaf if this happens, if I'm past my exam. So this would be wajib. Then the next type of i'tikaf is i'tikaf that is masnoon, i'tikaf that is sunnah, and that is i'tikaf that's in the last 10 days of Ramadan. It's an i'tikaf that is sunnah. It's sunnah mu'akkada. It's sunnah mu'akkada to perform i'tikaf in the last 10 days of Ramadan. And here the Hanafi madhab say as well, you need to be fasting. You need to be fasting. So if you are not fasting, your i'tikaf becomes the third category. The third category is a nafl i'tikaf, which can happen at any time. And this one here is nafl, and this one here you do not need to be fasting. So just going into the mosque and performing i'tikaf randomly or for salah or at any time of the day, this you do not need to be fasting. And it would not be sunnah i'tikaf, rather it would be nafl. And they say the i'tikaf in the last 10 days of Ramadan is sunnah mu'akkada. Now Ibn Abidin touches on a very important mas'ala when it comes to usool and understanding evidences. Some of them would say it's wajib. Some of the ulama indicate it being wajib because Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam constantly performed i'tikaf in the last 10 days of Ramadan. But now the rest of the ulama, none of them take that it's wajib. None of the mainstream or the mainstream opinion say it's wajib. And the reason for that, Ibn Abidin says that yes, Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam did it constantly. So first of all, it was an action. If he said perform i'tikaf, you have to perform i'tikaf, then it's a command. Now we can say wajib. But here it's an action, number one. But Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam did it constantly. So it now becomes a stronger action. So therefore it becomes sunnah muakkada. But why not wajib? He says because those who did not do i'tikaf, Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam did not reprimand them. He did not tell them to do it. He did not ask them why did they not do it. He did not speak anything about them. So he left them, which indicates that it's not wajib. And him doing it constantly makes it sunnah muakkada. And then they say وَيَلْزِمَانْ الْإِعْتِكَافُ وَالصَّوْمِ النَّذْرِ. They say that i'tikaf or salah or whatever action it may be, it will become wajib on a person if he takes an oath. If he takes an oath, oh Allah, if I pass my exam, I'll fast 3 days. Oh Allah, if I am cured, then I will recite an amount of the Quran. So when a person takes an oath, then it becomes wajib on a person to perform that action. It becomes wajib on a person to perform that action. But for an oath to do an act of worship, the ulama say it's better for a person not to take the oath. It's called the nadhr al-tabarrur. Nadhr al-tabarrur. It's one of the 4 or 5 types, one of the 5 or 7 types, according to some fuqaha, of an oath. It's where you take an oath to do an act of worship. Or you take an oath, you make it hanging. Hanging meaning, oh Allah, if this happens, then I will do this. Oh Allah, if I am cured, then I will fast. So they say to start this, to make an oath to do an act of worship, they say to take an oath to do an act of worship is makruh. Why? Because Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam said, لا يرد شيئا وإنما يستخرج من البخيل. That taking an oath does not change anything. Oh Allah, if you cure me, I will fast 3 days. It's not going to affect anything. But the oath, the nadhr, the vow, is like to take something from a stingy person. So it's like somebody stingy with their ibadah. Oh, Allah will only fast 3 days for you if you cure me. So it's like you're stingy with your ibadah. So they say to start the nadhr, it's makruh, the vow. But once you've taken the vow, so that would mean that if you say, oh Allah, if I pass my exam, I will give $100 a charity. To give $100 first without the vow is more virtuous. But because it's makruh to take the vow for an ibadah. But then after you've taken the vow, now it's waajib to complete the vow. So now to give charity without the vow, it's a recommended act, it's mustahab. But with the vow, it now becomes wajib. So now to do the vow, to fulfill the vow would be more virtuous than to do the action. That's a nafl action. And that's why Allah praises those who fulfill their vows. Yufuna bin nadhr. They fulfill their vows. So Allah praises them in one of His attributes for those who are going to enter into Jannah, one of the actions they did. So they say a person who took an oath that he's going to perform itikaaf and perform salaah, he's going to perform itikaaf while praying salaah. Right? Or he took an oath that he's going to pray salaah when he goes for itikaaf, let's say after Asr. They say you do not need to spend the entire time in i'tikaf. They say what would fulfill the vow is 2 rak'ah, or even 1 rak'ah, but 2 rak'ah. And then they say if a person took an oath to perform i'tikaf in the last 10 days of Ramadan, but it happened to be that Ramadan was 29 days, so he did i'tikaf for 9 days, then that would be valid. He doesn't need to give a kafara for the vow not being fulfilled. But if he took an oath to perform i'tikaf for the last 10 days of any other month, they say in the first scenario, because Ramadan, we call it the last 10 nights anyway, whether it's 9 or 10. But for another month, if it was 9 days, he has to do qadha of 1 day, and then he has to do kafara because he could not fulfill the vow of 10 days on its time, because the month was 29 days. That's if he specified, I'm going to spend the last 10 days of Rajab in i'tikaf, and then it happened to be Rajab was 29 days. So then he missed the last day of Rajab, which he has to do qadha of, and then give kafara because he's going to finish the 10th day not in Rajab. And then they mention the mas'ala of I think we'll finish with this mas'ala. It will take a few minutes, but we did start a bit later. And that is the mas'ala of the masjid. What is the mas'ala of i'tikaf in the masjid? So here generally the fuqaha mention what is deemed the masjid. But there is a mas'ala where there's a few details and the fuqaha differ. So inshallah, it's because after the chapter of i'tikaf, many fuqaha mention the rules of masajid. So after we're done with the chapters of fasting, then inshallah we'll mention that chapter of the masjid and rules related to the masjid connected to his waqf and those things. We'll specify a lesson for it of what exactly is a masjid and those things. But they say, now the opinion of most of the ulama, except the Hanafi madhab, is that i'tikaf is only valid in a masjid, in what is deemed a masjid, which means a house or musallaa, things like that. It would not count. It would not count. Only what is a masjid. A masjid is generally, as a summary, it's a place that is waqf, that is made waqf. It's donated to Allah. And it's donated to Allah for salah being performed in this place. And generally, a building must be built. A building must be built. And that will be a masjid. So waqf, it doesn't belong to anyone, it belongs to Allah. And waqf, for what? For the benefit of the Muslims? No. For salah being performed in it. And number 3, generally, a building should be built. A building should be built, that would be a masjid, and the rules of a masjid would apply to that. Now in the hanbali madhab, they say a masjid that i'tikaf can be performed in is a masjid where the salah takes place 5 times a day. So it won't, not Jumu'ah is not a stipulation. And it will also not be valid in a mosque where Jumu'ah takes place but not the rest of the salah. Because a person has to perform salah in jama'ah in the hanbali madhab. And they say, if the salah is not taking place in the mosque, he will not be able to achieve that, which is performing salah in jama'ah. That means that if a person is sitting in i'tikaf at a time where there's no salah, as in he's sitting, let's say, in the morning between sunrise and dhuhr, there's no i'tikaf, there's no salah in jama'ah, then it's permissible for him to perform the i'tikaf in any mosque. Whether the salah performed in 5 times a day or not doesn't matter. Or a person does not have to perform salah in jama'ah because he's a traveler or because it's a female, etc. Or they say if there's 2 or more people in i'tikaf where a jama'ah can be formed with those few people, then that's okay. If more than one person are sitting in a place where jama'ah is not taking place in that mosque, then it's okay, it's valid. Overall, the Maliki and Shafi'i in general, they say any masjid would count. The Hanafi madhab say that it should be a mosque, and they say it must have an imam and a muaddin, and then the salah is performed 5 times a day in that mosque. They say what they describe as a mosque in their madhab, which we'll discuss later inshallah. In general, what is a mosque? It must have an imam and a muaddin, and the salah must be performed 5 times a day there. And the second opinion in the madhab is that if 5 times salah is not performed there, then it will still be valid. It will still be valid. But if it's a mosque where Jumu'ah is performed, what's called a jami', which is commonly known and used in Arab countries compared to non-Arab countries. They don't differentiate between a mosque where Jumu'ah is performed. They don't differentiate in a title referring to a mosque where Jumu'ah is performed differently to where it's not performed. So, but when Jumu'ah is performed in the mosque, then i'tikaf in there is valid. And some of the muftis from India, they have said that in a mosque where salah is not performed 5 times a day, the Hanafi muftis, it will be valid, i'tikaf will be valid in there. So that's for regards to a masjid. And then they mention سوى مسجد بيتها وهو الموضع التي تتخذه لصلاتها. So the second last mas'ala is that of a lady performing i'tikaf. Here the hanbali, shafi'i and maliki schools say that for a lady to perform i'tikaf in her house is not valid. She has to perform i'tikaf in the masjid, because the wives of Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam, they performed i'tikaf in the masjid. And Ibn Abbas radiallahu anhu was asked about i'tikaf in one's home, so he said, بدعة وأبغض الأعمال إلى الله البدع لا اعتكاف إلا في مسجد تقام فيه الجماعة وتقام فيه الصلاة. He said that a woman performing i'tikaf in her house is a bid'ah, and the actions most abhorred to Allah are bid'ah. And he said there's no valid i'tikaf in any place other than a mosque wherein the salah is performed, when the salah is regularly and generally performed. So that's according to the majority of the ulama. The Hanafi madhab, they say i'tikaf for a lady is performed at her house. They say it's performed at her house. In the mosque it will be makruh, but it will be valid. And some of the evidences and reasons are, number one, they say because salah for a lady is better in her house. Salah for a lady is better in her house. And if salah is more important than i'tikaf, how can salah be better at home but i'tikaf better in the mosque? And they are generally more strict, the later Hanafi ulama, with a lady going out of her house to perform salah in the mosque. So then if salah is more important than i'tikaf, how can salah take this rule, and a lesser thing take a rule that i'tikaf is better in the mosque? Number one. And then they also have a narration in Sahih Muslim where Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam commanded that a tent be set up for him in the mosque to perform i'tikaf. And then some of his wives, like Zainab radiallahu anha, also commanded a tent for her to be put up in the mosque. And then some other of his wives did so as well, radiallahu anhun. So Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam, when he saw this, he said, why are they doing this? Are they seeking a specific virtue? He said this in a way that he was not approving of what they did. And then he said his tent should be taken out, meaning he wants to cancel his i'tikaf, and then he will perform it in the first 10 days of Shawwal. So the Hanafi madhab have looked at this mas'ala, has looked at this hadith, and have took it from an angle that Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam is not approving the ladies' i'tikaf in the mosque. Another one of the evidences are that Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam commanded أن تبنى المساجد في الدور, that masajid be built in. This word door The fuqaha differ. So majority of the fuqaha say that it means masajid should be built in every locality and community. Everywhere there should be masajid. But the word dur is plural of dar. Dar is a house. So they've said, the Hanafi, one of the reasons of the Ahnaf is that a masjid should be built, should be set up in the house. So it indicates that this place of salah in the house, your musallaa, that's called a masjid. That's called a masjid. So a lady should perform i'tikaf there. And with regards to this lady's i'tikaf in her house, they say it's a place where she performs a salah generally. She has a specific place and corner or spot where she performs a salah. That's where her i'tikaf should take place. Now if she doesn't have a specific spot and she wants to perform i'tikaf, what does she do? She sets up a specific spot. She makes the intention that from now my salah is going to be performed in this spot. Or if she wants to change it before Ramadan or before the last 10 nights, she changes a spot, maybe to a place more comfortable for her for i'tikaf. Then she takes a musallaa, whatever she prays on, or if she prays on something, then she takes it to a specific corner, or she just starts praying in that specific side, and that's a new place, and she can perform i'tikaf there. And then they say a big room cannot be used for i'tikaf. A lady cannot specify this room that's quite big. Rather, she specifies either a small room or a small section in the big room. So she specifies a specific section where she can sleep and do her things. Not too big, but also not too small for her. And number 3, then all the rules that apply to a male for i'tikaf in the mosque will apply to the lady, will apply to a lady at home, which we'll discuss a bit later. Like leaving the place of i'tikaf. Can they just leave? What breaks if a person leaves, etc. Connected to this, we'll mention it now, maybe again later, and that is if a lady needs to cook while she's in i'tikaf at her house, then the Hanafi madhab they say that if there's no one else to cook, then she can leave her place of i'tikaf and go and cook. Then she can go and cook. So, and I think most of those are masail, most of the masail specifically connected to this, of a lady i'tikaf in her house. Lastly, then some of the Hanafi ulama, the fatwa of some muftis in India, is they also allow i'tikaf in a musallaa, where the salah is performed most of the time. They allow i'tikaf in a musallaa, where the salah is performed most of the time. They say it's hoped a person will get the reward for it. And then they also say about a prisoner, can he perform i'tikaf? They say no i'tikaf for the prisoner in his cell. He cannot say he's performing i'tikaf in his cell. Rather, if the prison has a musallaa, then he can do i'tikaf there. And then they also say for a male i'tikaf in his house. And specifically they mentioned it for, like when there was specific restrictions of going to the mosque and things like that. Then they said that based on these fatwa of some of the Hanafi ulama from India, the contemporary ulama, they allowed i'tikaf to be performed in a place outside the mosque, like a musallaa that we just said, where most of the salah is performed. And then based on that as well, they allowed a man to then perform his i'tikaf in his house, because the masjid was not applicable and no musallaa would be applicable. So then a man then performs i'tikaf in his house, and the same rules then would apply for him as it applies to a lady. And we end there. We ask Allah Azza wa Jal to accept from us and to bless us. And we ask Allah Azza wa Jal that He teaches us that which benefits us, and that He benefits us with that which He teaches us. وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وأصحابه أجمعين والحمد لله رب العالمين.